There you go, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that fine introduction. It's good to be here again. When I was in Texas, I happened to get ordained with Calvary Chapel of Weston, Texas. So I'm now an official Calvary Chapel minister. And I've been teaching for a number of years down at the Calvary Chapel Bible College in Murrieta. And of course, I always tell my students at the beginning of the semester that in order to maintain discipline, punishment will be issued every day. And their eyes get as big as saucers. And I said, don't worry too much. It's punishment in the form of biblical puns. So you all look like a rather rowdy group, so I'm going to have to issue some punishment. Let's see. How do we know that Jesus owned two famous bulls? Nobody knows how we know that Jesus owned two famous bulls? Well, I figure he must have owned two famous bulls because to this day, sermons are still preached about Jesus's pair of bulls. Yeah, a few of them got that. Okay, very good, very good. Okay. Okay, just one more. Who is the first long-term drug addict mentioned in the Bible? The first long-term drug addict mentioned in the Bible. It was King Nebuchadnezzar, because the Bible says he was on grass for 7 years. Okay, enough punishment. You're not groaning enough anyway. Okay. Today, we're going to perhaps have more punishment. Let's advance the slide manually, please. They guaranteed me this would work. I told the pastor they say that every time. Okay. And it is not working still. Okay. Are we running any program in the background, anything other than the PowerPoint? Well, I'm clicking and it's not ticking like the Timex. Oh, there we go. Okay, so today we're going to look at Darwinism, Massacred by a Monarch. And we're going to have to massacre this computer system here because it's just not working. Okay. Oh boy. Well, it's going to be difficult to get through this on time, having to say next slide, next effect and everything, but I guess that's what we'll have to do. We've got to be instant in season and out of season, and this just is not working. So, and we got a feedback here. Hope we don't cause a minor earthquake with the feedback. Anyway, the monarch that has massacred Darwin's theory is not an earthly or human monarch like the infamous Henry VIII, who had 6 wives. Or was it the 8 wives of Henry VI? No, it was the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And he lived in the day of sovereign monarchs, when if you offended the king, all he had to do was say, next effect, please. That means you back there, thank you. Off with his head. Although he was more famous for saying, next effect, please. Off. Okay. Well, I think you're wrong. Okay. Okay, because it's not working. They guaranteed me this would work. If they hadn't guaranteed it, it wouldn't have been so bad. Off with her head. There we go. Off with her head. And, of course, his wives that displeased them got beheaded. But the monarch who has destroyed Darwin's theory is not a human monarch, but rather, well, I guess we won't find that out. I could connect my own. I could put my own remote control in there. Maybe that would work better. Okay. There we go. But this monarch, the Monarch Butterfly, which is light and delicate but contains mountain loads of powerful evidence that has crushed the stuffing out of Darwin's theory. However, I always start by quoting Richard Dawkins, the most obnoxious and vociferous atheist evolutionist in the world today. And he said biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. See, the way that they explain marvelous design in biology, like the monarch butterfly, is to say it's an illusion. It looks like it was purposefully designed, but it wasn't. Well, gee, if it looks like it was purposefully designed, how does he know that it was not? Well, he doesn't know, he just doesn't want to accept it. And so he said it's an illusion, it actually happened by natural processes. We also have the Nobel Prize-winning geneticist Francis Crick, Sir Francis Crick. He was knighted by the Queen of England. He said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Now, How are they ever going to see evidence for intelligent design if they've made up their mind before they look at anything that no matter what we see, no matter how technologically advanced and complex and above and beyond anything that we can produce even with 21st century technology, no matter what, it had to have evolved. You see, as the old proverb says, there are no eyes so blind as those that refuse to see. And the problem with them is not that they cannot see, but that they will not see. As Jesus said to his disciples, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For many, I tell you, have willfully blinded their minds and their eyes, and willfully deafened their ears, and they will never see the truth. But your eyes are blessed, and your ears are blessed if you can see and hear. Many people today cannot." Now again, Richard Dawkins says, "We have seen that living things are too improbable and too beautifully designed, quote unquote, to have come into existence by chance." Oh, well, if even the illusion of design is so complex it could not have happened by pure chance, then we need a creator after all. Not so quick. He is all right with having a creator as long as it's something like an alien or as long as it's something like natural selection. But he doesn't want a personal creator like Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ said something he didn't like. "Except you repent, you will all likewise perish." You know, we don't hear that message too often anymore, but Jesus said if you don't repent, you will perish. And without holiness, no man will see the Lord, Paul wrote. So, yeah, things like that they don't like. They want to be their own God, make up their own morality, do their own thing, and not be accountable for every thought, word, and deed of their life. Well, we don't have to fear our God because somebody took the condemnation for us. Somebody took the guilt and the shame and the judgment for us, and we don't have to fear our God. But he does say you have to repent, and that's something that just sticks in their craw. So Richard Dawkins and others say that the design we see was actually done by a substitute designer, the kind of designer or creator that he's comfortable with. He calls it the blind watchmaker. Now, why does he use this terminology, blind watchmaker? Well, he's hearkening back to the old argument of William Paley. William Paley says if you're walking down a street or actually down a trail in the woods, you stub your toe on something and you reach down and pick it up and you find out, wow, it's a gold pocket watch. And you open it up and look at the intricate cogs and wheels and how it's so purposefully designed to deliver accurate time. And he said nobody would say, well, I know how that got there. This pine sap fell out of this pine tree and chemically reacted with the soil, and a few centuries of solar energy provided all that was necessary to produce a pocket watch. He said nobody would ever believe that because in all the history of the world we've never observed that to happen. Complicated machines arise by one means only. All of experimental science agrees with that, and that is by intelligent design. And he said the far greater complexity in nature shows a far greater watchmaker, a divine watchmaker, so to speak. Well, Richard Dawkins wants a creator who he can live with, and that's a creator who does everything by natural processes. And his name for natural selection is this, the blind watchmaker. Now, natural selection is just a process we observe in nature whereby if an animal is sick or crippled, it's not likely to compete very well with an animal that's healthy. And so the sick and crippled ones tend to die off and not leave offspring, and the ones that are healthy and vibrant tend to survive and leave offspring. That's all it is. It's a process in nature. It is not an intelligent, omniscient, omnipotent creator. It's just a process in nature that if you're crippled or sick, you're likely to die, whereas if you're not, you're likely to survive. It's not a big, profound thing, and it's certainly not a substitute creator. But if you get rid of the real God, that's about all you've got left. But their blind watchmaker is not just blind. He is also mindless and unconscious. You see, blind people can do amazing things. You know, you can have a blind concert pianist, because even though their eyes don't work, they still have conscious awareness and intelligence. And with years of practice and identifying where they are on the keyboard by touch, they can do a beautiful, perfect concerto, and if you're hearing it on radio, you'd have no idea the person was blind, because it's done with perfection. Because they have two things that their blind watchmaker doesn't have. They have conscious awareness and intelligence. But the blind watchmaker of natural selection is mindless and unconscious in addition to being blind. Or to put it another way, say you're laying in the emergency room and you have terrible chest pains and they've examined you and they said, well, the tests show that you have a congenital heart defect and your heart's about to blow and you'll die within the hour if you don't have immediate corrective surgery. Fortunately, we have a surgeon on staff at this hospital, and here he comes, and the double doors of the emergency room burst open, and here comes the surgeon on a gurney. And you look over at him and you notice that he is blind, mindless, and unconscious. This can mean only one thing. You are going to die. That kind of a surgeon doesn't even deserve to be called a surgeon. That kind of a watchmaker doesn't deserve to be called a watchmaker or a creator. If you're blind, mindless, and unconscious, you are helpless, hopeless, and worthless. And that's exactly what their God is like. He's like Baal. Oh, Baal, you know, come and give us fire on the altar. Well, they'd cut themselves and scream and shout, but Baal was a worthless, helpless, impotent God. When Elijah prayed to the true God, fire fell from heaven. We've got the true God. They got their pathetic blind watchmaker. Makes a big difference when you try to explain the world of biology. Now here we have a segment of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is the important information storage molecule of life. It stores fantastic amounts of information more efficiently than any of our supercomputers, as Bill Gates admitted quite openly. And it has to be read by molecular machines who know the language, can read it, and then translate it into another language. The language of function and structure, the language of proteins, enzymes, and hormones. And it is very important in that it contains the information, the blueprint information that guides the growth, self-maintenance, and eventual reproduction of all living creatures. However, it is not life in and of itself. It's a very important constituent of life, but you need much, much more than DNA to have life. But it would be an important step toward getting, say, the first cell. Now, Darwin, in his ignorance in the mid-1800s, when he authored his book on the origin of species, he had no idea about the complexity of life at the molecular level. Nobody did. But we sure know it today, in the 21st century. And we know the specifics of the structure, just how 100% exact it has to be to function properly and to even function at all. And so we can run calculations now that Darwin was oblivious to because they didn't know what they had to shoot for. Well, we do know today. We have to get all right-handed deoxyribose sugars. They exist in two different mirror image forms, levorotatory and dextrorotatory. You'll have to remember that, it'll be on the test. But it simply means left and right-handed. You have the same constituent atoms, but they're in a mirror image relationship, just like your left and right hands are mirror images of each other, but not superimposable. That's why a left-hand glove will not fit properly on a right hand. That seems like a minor difference, but it makes a whale of a difference biologically. If you get just one left-handed sugar, deoxyribose sugar in there, it destroys the function of the whole molecule. So you have to have 100% purity, and there's no law of physics or chemistry that says only right-handed can bond to the polymer. Now, what does that mean? It means it's left up to chance. So it's like flipping a penny. When you flip a penny, you have a 1 out of 2 probability of getting a head versus a tail, okay? What's the odds of getting 3 heads in a row? Well, you have to multiply the independent probability of each step in that chain. So it's 1 out of 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. So you'll find that on the average, if you took 3 pennies and threw them up in the air and let them fall on the ground, you'd have to do that 8 times on the average before you get all 3 heads up and not a single tail. But that's not so hard to do. You know, you can throw up 3 pennies 8 times, doesn't take that long. What if we have to get 1,000 heads in a row in succession without a single tail, or it doesn't work and you have to start all over? Now the odds become literally infinitesimal. It's 1 in 2 multiplied by itself 1,000 times, or 2 to the 1,000th power. Now usually, when we express a number in scientific notation, we'll do a logarithmic conversion from base 2, multiples of 2, to base 10, multiples of 10. When the number is expressed as multiples of 10, the exponent number tells you something. It tells you how many zeros come after the number 1. So this number, 2 to the 1,000th power, converts to 10 to the power of 300, the number 1 with 300 zeros after it. Now, is that a big number? Yes. How do we know? It's bigger than the national debt under Obama. So, you know it's got to be big. But it is bigger than any of us can comprehend, including myself, and I use big numbers all the time. For example, if we take a standard of measure, say electrons, the tiny little electrical charges that orbit around atoms trillions of times per second, we still don't know exactly how small they are, although a standard estimate says they're so tiny that if you stack one electron on top of another until they stack up in a single line 1 inch high, it would take 2.5 quadrillion electrons. That's so many that if you counted them rapidly, 250 per minute, day and night, 24/7, it would only take you 19 million years to count the electrons that stack up to 1 inch. So those buggers are awfully small. You can imagine how many of them exist in this building, in the great state of Nevada, in the Western Hemisphere, in the world, in the solar system, in the Milky Way galaxy, in the billions of galaxies in the known universe. Anybody have an estimate of the total number of protons, electrons, and neutrons in the entire known universe? Well, they estimate it's about 10 to the power of 80. The number 1 with 80 zeros after it. This number for this one feature is 10 to the power of 300, which means this number exceeds the number of protons, electrons, and neutrons by about 100 quintillion Google. Now, a Google in mathematics is 10 to the 100th power, not the one on the internet, and they are spelled differently. But that's just the beginning. We also have to get the right bonds between the nucleotides. They can bond in two different ways, and neither one is forced by nature. It again is a matter of chance. Well, guess what? That's 1 and 2 to the 1000th power again, or 10 to the 300th power, just to get the right bonds in the nucleotides. We have to exclude all the non-biological compounds that would be bobbing around in the alleged primitive ocean, and the experiments show that would be like 99 to 1, so it would be like 99, 1 and 99 to the 1000th power, but we'll be nice and say it's just 1 and 10. So that's 1 and 10 to the 1000th power. Then we have to get all the nucleotides in the right order. Adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine, 4 different nucleotides. They have to be in the right order, like alphabet letters in a sentence have to be in the right order to carry correct information. And if they're just a bunch of gibberish, they carry no information at all. Well, that's 1 and 4 to the 1000th power. Now we have to multiply all these independent features together to get all of these features at the same place, in the same time, in the same molecule. So it's 1 and 10 to the 300th power times 10 to the 300th power times 10 to the 1000th power times 10 to the 600th power. Anybody know what that comes out to be? Comes out to be 1 chance in 10 to the power of 2,200, which in mathematics we would say that this event can never transpire anywhere in space and time because it violates the Borelian law of chance, which states that probabilities whose odds are extremely small never occur anywhere in the universe. And the law states if it gets beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power, you can write it off. It won't happen anywhere in this universe, not even in 20 billion years. Now that's how you say it mathematically. In layman's language, we simply say, there ain't no way, Jose. Okay? And it's not going to happen. Now, to put that in terms we can all understand, if we had a trillion universes as big as ours, and every atom within those trillion universes were replaced with a less than average size DNA molecule of 1,000 nucleotides, which, by the way, I should have mentioned that's less than average size. Average size is more around 1,200 nucleotides, because they code for proteins that are about 400 nucleotides on the, or 400 amino acids on the average. Anyway, enough of that technical stuff. The point is, we have a trillion universes as big as ours. Every atom in those universes is now replaced with a DNA molecule of 1,000 nucleotides that randomly breaks apart and reassembles randomly 1 billion times per second. And that continues for a trillion years. The odds of you getting the correct structure after all that time and effort is still 0 in any operational sense of reality. It still would put no practical dent in that number, 10 to the power of 2,200. That's what those numbers mean. Now, it doesn't mean it can't happen at all. It certainly can happen by intelligent design and control, but it never, ever could happen by chance. Now, if we did somehow get that first cell, how are we going to change it from, say, an amoeba into a man? Well, you have to take the DNA of that cell and change it and get it more complex and add new blueprint information for structures and functions and organs that don't even exist in an amoeba. How, pray tell, do the evolutionists do that? Well, they say mutation and natural selection. Now, mutation simply means change, but in the biological sense, evolutionary sense, it means random, accidental, never intelligently guided change. Purely random, accidental. Okay, well, let's try that out and see if that works. Does anybody recognize this sentence? The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. Some of your older senior citizens, like myself, probably do. That's a standard typing drill that used to be used on the old typewriters, manual typewriters, remember those? It contains all 26 letters of the English language, and you type it over and over to learn the standard keyboard. Okay? Now, if what they say is true, random accidental changes, which is what mutations are, copying errors or changes induced by radiation damage or whatever it may be, it's always random. Can we randomly change this and make it better and get a bigger storyline? Well, let's try it out. Let's have 3 random mistakes, typographical errors, which are analogous to mutations. We get the Dwick Brown Aox jumped over the Lost Eogs. Well, that didn't work very well. Maybe 6 random mistakes will do the trick. We get the Dwick Brazen Aox triumphed over the Lost Eogs. Well, it sounds a little Swedish perhaps, but I'll tell you, no Swede could read that because it doesn't make sense in any language. In just 6 random mistakes, we've taken meaningful information and debilitated it and degraded it into unintelligible, useless gibberish. That's why whenever mutations are large enough to actually observe, they almost always cause blindness, sterility, disease, deformity, and death. They're far more likely to cripple you or to kill you than they are to help you. But when you get rid of the almighty creator God, that's the best you have to work with. This destructive mutational process coupled with the blind, brainless, unconscious watchmaker of evolution. Unholy trinity if ever there was one. Okay. Now, I love this analogy. We have this fellow sitting on his easy chair throwing rocks at his old analog television set, and he says, well, maybe this next rock will mutate this analog set into a widescreen, high-definition digital TV. Oh, would that it were true. You know, I have some old analog sets. I'd love to throw rocks at them and just make them so much better. But how can damaging old parts bring into existence de novo, new and better parts of a superior technology that never existed before just by damaging the old parts? The more you damage the old parts, the more damaged they're going to be until they turn into dust. They're not going to get better, and you don't have to live long on this planet to realize random accidents don't make anything better. They make it far worse. To his credit, Theodosius Dobzhansky, the greatest evolutionist of the 20th century, admitted that their mechanism of random mutations and natural selection on the surface appeared to be counterintuitive, which simply means it is nonsensical, doesn't make common sense, okay? So he said, an accident, a random change in any delicate mechanism, can hardly be expected to improve it. Poking a stick into the machinery of one's watch or one's radio set will seldom make it work better. Well, poking mutations into the marvelous genetic code that God programmed at the beginning is not going to make it work better. It's going to degenerate down into a genetic load that will cause everything to eventually go extinct. So we get downward degradation, we don't get upward improvement, as Darwin said. Now, the natural selection deception, and this is very important because evolutionists lie about this all the time. I noticed in the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, which I have a critique of that back there on video, even Bill Nye said, oh yes, well, natural selection produces complexity. It creates complexity in information. Well, no, it does not. Its name is not the natural creator, it's the natural selector. So it doesn't create anything, it simply selects something that is offered to it by another process. What does the offering that then gets selected? Random destructive mutations. That's what. And we've already seen that does not work, either analytically or mathematically, and certainly not experimentally. So the natural selection deception is this. Natural selection has no power to create new and better biological information. Rather, it is wholly at the mercy of random destructive mutations to provide the necessary new information. Since random mutations cannot produce the needed results, in other words, new and better information, natural selection is left helpless with nothing better to select. Therefore, the change over time will be degenerative, downward, leading eventually to extinction over time, but never progressive in the evolutionary sense. Now, bear that in mind as we look at the fantastic technology of the amazing Monarch butterfly. Now then, first of all, I want to point out why the monarch is considered the king of butterflies. There are at least 7 good reasons. Number 1, it lives longer than any other butterfly. Number 2, it has a wider distribution over the earth than any other butterfly. Number 3, it migrates further than any other butterfly, over 5,000 kilometers, in other words, over 3,000 miles. Number 4, it is the most widely recognized butterfly in North America and probably in the world because it is so famous. And fifthly, it can navigate over the ocean beyond the side of land, and not just barely beyond the side of land. It can go over an ocean it's never seen in its life, more than 1,000 kilometers, and pinpoint tiny islands that it somehow knows are there, even though it's never seen them before. It is true precision navigation capability in a supercomputer brain no bigger than the head of a pin. Number 6, it grows faster in proportion to starting weight than virtually any creature in the animal kingdom. There are some creatures that end up bigger compared to their starting weight, but none of them does it as fast as the monarch. The monarch grows from a tiny little worm that crawls out of the monarch egg. It's only 2 millimeters long. And in 20 days, it grows to weigh 2,700 times more than it did when it hatched. Nothing exceeds that rate of growth in the entire world of biology. Number 7, it is adorned with a crown and jewelry that mimics the metallic shine of genuine gold. This is rather rare in the world of biology. But in the chrysalis stage, the monarch has a golden crown and golden jewelry. Very rare, but I think it is appropriate that the Creator has seen fit to endow the king of butterflies with the type of crown and jewelry that monarchs have endowed themselves with for thousands of years, the metallic sheen of genuine gold. Now we're going to look at metamorphosis, an evolutionary enigma. Now, metamorphosis is a compound Greek word coming from the Greek word meta, meaning change, and morphe, which means shape. So it means a radical changing of shape. And yet, as we understand in the 21st century, the biggest, most radical changes happen on the inside, where you can't see what's happening. But it is a symphony of incredible orchestrated machinery following genetic blueprint information and causing this radical transformation to take place. But it is an evolutionary enigma because you can't figure out why in the world evolution would even want to try to do something like this. Evolution is based on slight little changes adding up over ages of time to finally bring perfection. But we have a problem here, something Darwin was not aware of, but we find it many times in the world of biology, and that is the problem of irreducible complexity. In other words, you can't just get a little bit of change here and a little bit of change, and then finally you have something that works. It either all works instantly and perfectly, or you die and go extinct. Those are some pretty heavy stakes, okay? It's either do or die, immediate design perfection, or you die, or you can't reproduce, which is bad as dying because there's no new generation. You go extinct in one generation. Nothing's more important in biology than reproduction, because if you don't reproduce, there is no next generation. So we have here something that has to be done for the monarch to survive. Now you think evolution would try to do something simple. For example, you have a worm or a caterpillar, and it has to get out of Dodge because where the milkweed grows, and that's the only thing it can eat, is this poisonous milkweed. You might think, wow, I don't eat that poisonous stuff. You ever tasted milkweed? Oh my gosh, it is so bitter, it's so horrible. And that's why predators, birds in particular, do not like to eat monarch caterpillars, because they eat nothing their whole life but poisonous milkweed with the milkweed toxin in it. And so if they eat one of those caterpillars, they'll vomit them out or they'll die because it's just full of that milkweed poison. That's also why they're striped. Notice black outlined by bright colors, white and yellow. That means, hey, I'm not trying to hide myself, I'm not trying to camouflage myself, I'm poisonous and I'm advertising it, don't eat me, okay? Now, the worm eats nothing but poison all its life because that's its nature. It can't eat anything but milkweed. It will not eat anything but milkweed. But the poison that the worm eats is retained so that when it turns into a marvelous, beautiful, heavenly creature that can fly in the heavens, it no longer has to eat poison. It can eat nectar of flowers, which gives its high energy for flying and doing these amazing migrations. But because the worm ate poison, it is protected from predators, and that protection extends even to its majestic state in the monarch butterfly. But the point is, since the milkweed grows in, the central North America and up as far north as southern Canada, they have to migrate up there to lay their eggs on their only food source. But then they have to get down in the winter because they're very susceptible to death by freezing. They cannot handle freezing temperature at all. So you'd think evolution would say, well, some slight change, we got to do something to fix this problem. So we'll evolve some claws so that the caterpillar can dig down to the ground deep enough to where it gets, where freezing temperature won't reach it. It can hibernate, then come back up in the spring and summer, eat milkweed, go back down in the winter, up and down, and then maybe over hundreds of thousands of years it can evolve into a butterfly. Anybody see a problem with that? There is a problem because the caterpillars have no sexual organs. They can't reproduce in the caterpillar stage. And sexual organs, again, are not only extremely important, but they're some of the most complex organs in the entire world of biology. And they have to correspond correctly in both the male and female, all by blind random destructive mutations. A little hard pill to fit. But what the caterpillar does is inconceivable in terms of evolution. What does it do for survival of the fittest? Well, it can't crawl down to, say, Mexico. Neovolcanic mountains about 200 miles west of Mexico City is one of the main overwintering grounds for the monarchs. It can't crawl down there in time. It's going to freeze. So what does it do? It loses its eyes. It entombs itself with a tomb of its own making into this chrysalis. It retreats into darkness and blindness, and when it goes in there, it largely decomposes itself. Almost all of its body parts, almost all of its cells, except for a few of the marginal cells that are required, are all broken down into this green biochemical soup of just basic biochemical building blocks. Then in just 8 days, the number of new beginnings, those few cells left over with their amazing genetic blueprint already thought out, already programmed, takes those basic building blocks and completely reorchestrates a new heavenly creature that comes out no longer bound to the earth, no longer having to eat poison to survive, but it can fly more than any other insect in the world, 5,000 kilometers. And it's a creature of the heavens, and it eats heavenly food, nectar of flowers, instead of poison. It's a beautiful type and shadow of the power of God to transform us from poison, sinful worms through death and resurrection into a new heavenly life. It's something you could see God doing, but evolution would never even attempt to do. I mean, what is survival value in putting yourself in a tomb and then decomposing yourself as if you're dead and rotting in the grave? What survival value is there in that? And then hoping that maybe some blind random destructive mutations might come along and completely reorchestrate the genetic code so you can turn into a marvelous creature that can navigate further than any other insect in the world? It's a little hard to buy. With God, this is possible, but with men it's impossible. And with nature, it's impossible. You know, if we define a miracle as something that is supernatural, in other words, beyond what natural forces of chemistry, physics, and chance can do, and we define it as something that's superhuman, something beyond what even man with his technology and intelligence can do, then we have miracles all around us. There's one right here. But there are many. The tiniest blade of grass could not have happened by chance and natural laws, nor could it be produced by man. If we started from scratch with the basic chemical compounds, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, etc., and tried to produce a single cell, much less a blade of grass, we could not do it for love nor money. Not with all the trillions of dollars in the World Bank, not with the top engineer team from every country in the world. It could not be done because we don't have the ability even in the 21st century. With God, this is possible, but with men, it is impossible. Well, how all does this work? Well, the monarch butterfly female lays that little egg on the only food it can eat, the milkweed, and she can lay in her brief lifespan. Now, they have several generations when they're flying up, like from Mexico. They'll take a good 3 generations to get up to, say, Nova Scotia, southern Canada. And that 4th generation then has to fly all the way back. Amazing thing. They only live about 3 to 6 weeks in those first few generations, and during that time, the female can lay anywhere from 4 to 800 eggs during that brief lifespan. But then that 4th generation up there hatches out of that chrysalis, and it flies all the way back, some 5,000 plus kilometers, to a place it's never seen before. Goes to exactly the same tree that its great-great-grandparents came from earlier, because they can navigate that accurately. And its lifespan in that 4th generation, instead of being 3 to 6 weeks, it's a minimum of 8 months, longer than any other insect. So it has the time to fly back, to spend a few months overwintering during the cold months down there, still has enough lifespan to fly back up and start a new generation in central North America, where the only food it eats grows, the milkweed. So it is indeed an amazing thing. Now, the egg that they lay is truly a little beautiful thing. It's only about 4/100ths of an inch in diameter. It looks like a fat football with a flat end. It's glued onto the stem of the milkweed with a kind of a biological superglue. And the tiny little worm that comes out of there is only about 2 inches long. But that tiny little worm turns around and eats its eggshell, which gives it some important nutrients, and then it starts eating the milkweed leaf. But it does something that seems kind of weird. It tries to eat at the center of the leaf, which is hard, because, it's hard. It'd be much easier to go to the edge where you can get a hold of the edge with your, mandible and start chewing it. But it keeps digging and trying until it finally makes a hole in the middle of the leaf, and it only eats there. You see, the milkweed has this toxin in it that can kill the caterpillar. Oh, but they're immune. Not initially. They have a slight immunity when they're hatched, but they have to build up an immunity gradually. They can easily overdose on milkweed toxin and kill themselves, and that would be extinction for all of them. Somehow somebody programmed wisdom into their DNA that they know that they should eat only at the center of the leaf where there's far less toxin. Now the leaf responds, it detects damage at the center, and it starts moving its milkweed toxin, which it deploys at the edge of the leaf where most critters try to bite at the edge, not the center, and it starts moving it down toward the center. But by then, the little milkweed, or the little caterpillar has the wisdom to move out and start eating on the edge of the milkweed. Thus it gradually builds up its immunity to the milkweed toxin and doesn't kill itself. If it didn't have that programmed into it, they'd all die first time they hatched out of an egg. They'd eat too much milkweed toxin, overdose, and that would be the end of that. I don't think a bunch of blind random destructive mutations gave them that wisdom. Now, it eats and eats and eats and grows and grows and grows until from that 2 millimeter long little worm, it grows into a big fat caterpillar. that now weighs 2,700 times more than it did when it hatched. Now, to put that in human terms, that would be like having a 6-pound baby born. And in 20 days, it would grow to weigh 16,200 pounds. Yeah, that's what you call the ultimate baby boomer. And we've got that, we've got that with the Monarch for sure. Now, the Monarch caterpillar senses that it has enough stored energy and bionutrients that it can now do the amazing metamorphic process. And you want to watch carefully when this happens. The sign is that they put a little bit of silk on the milkweed stem and they attach to that with their rear legs. And they'll actually hang in a J shape. I like that. J, number for Jesus, the Creator, yes. Interesting what God puts in nature. And once it does that, it usually does that in the evening, you've got to be ready in the morning, because within about 12 hours it will do this metamorphic transformation. And once it starts, how long does it take? Anybody know? Usually no longer than about 60 seconds. And the incredible transformation takes place. It'll change from its J shape, it'll start gyrating and convulsing, it'll hang straight, and then a split takes place in its skin. All this has to be perfectly thought out and programmed, engineered into the DNA, and it's all taking place by micromolecular machines called enzymes that are driving these reactions, causing the split, causing everything. You know, if we could see what's happening inside at the molecular level, it would be mind-boggling. These machines are breaking down some components, building up others simultaneously, following a pre-programmed code that's just miraculous. I mean, the evolutionists, I've noticed in studying this, they cannot refrain from using the word miraculous when they describe the metamorphic process. They don't believe in a miracle worker, but they can't find any other adjective or adverb, to describe what's going on there. It is miraculous. Now, it has to split at just the right place. The skin has to be able to slough off properly. If it doesn't slough off and stays on there, it will not develop properly, it'll die. Something as simple as that. But here we have a really important thing happen. The skin falls off with the rear legs. The rear legs drop off, that's what's holding it on there. But at just the right instant, we have this post sticks up, the cremaster, and it has little tiny hooks on it, kind of like Velcro, and this thing is now retreated. It's lost its size, retreated into blindness and like a tomb of its own making, and at just the right time, the legs fall off and that sticks up and catches that silk. Perfect timing, because if it falls to the ground, it dies. It goes extinct. Everything has to be perfect. Then it continues to change shape with those machines, breaking some things down, putting other things together, bringing the perfect shape of the chrysalis, which if it doesn't have the right shape, it'll be deformed, it can't develop properly, it will die. And then it decomposes itself. Really good for survival value. Lose your eyes, retreat into darkness, decompose as if you're a dead, rotting corpse, but then somehow, by some miraculous power, transform and resurrect in just 8 days. 8, the number of new beginnings. So it goes into this tomb of its own making, the most helpless, hopeless state you could ever imagine, something you never expect evolution to put any creature into if it's wanting to have survival value. What's survivable about losing your eyes, retreating into a tomb, decomposing yourself like you're a rotting corpse, but then hoping that somehow by some miraculous transformation you can turn into a marvelous monarch butterfly. It happens in just 8 days. And then it breaks out because the chrysalis is creased in just the right way where it can exert its muscle power through its legs to break through. It knows enough to hang on. If it drops to the ground, it will not develop properly. It'll die. It has the instinct to hold on like crazy till it can pump the fluid and the blood into its wings. They fully deploy. They have to be fully, dry. And you can't help them. If you try to help them, it doesn't work. It's something they have to do themselves. It is a fantastic transformation, the antithesis of what you'd expect evolution to do. So why did God put this in nature? To show that with man this is impossible, with the blind watchmaker this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. God is a miracle-working God, and we see a miraculous transformation here. But it's more than just that. It's more than just to tweak the evolutionists and say, explain that. It's there to show a type and shadow that our God is the God who can take lowly, vile, poisonous creatures, such as us, with a poisonous, sinful nature, and by death and resurrection, we can be transformed into heavenly creatures for all eternity. That's the good news of the gospel. Now we're going to be looking at Monarch Migration, a navigational nightmare for evolution. And in this regard, I'm going to quote Jules H. Poirier, who is an aerospace navigational engineer. He's also a creationist scientist. But he was fascinated by the fact that he knew how hard it was to conceive of and create navigational instrumentation for airplanes as well as for spacecraft. And when he began to study the Monarch Butterfly, he realized, wow, even in the 21st century, we don't have the technology to make navigational equipment as small and as lightweight as what we have in the Monarch Butterfly. We could not make a replica. A self-navigating micro-aerial vehicle of that size and weight could not be done today for love nor money. So he wrote a whole book on it called From Darkness to Light to Flight, Monarch, the Miracle Butterfly, which you can get on Amazon, and I would highly recommend. But he got an opportunity to give a lecture to his fellow engineers. The company he was working for said, you engineers need to have better public speaking skills because sometimes the news media comes and they interview you and you guys fumble and mumble around, you know, and make us look bad. So you're going to have to get better public speaking skills. You have to give a 15 or 20-minute lecture to your fellow engineers. So he thought, aha, here's my opportunity. So he decided to lecture on a challenge to his fellow engineers to develop and produce a very lightweight, miniature, self-navigating aerial vehicle that could fly 5,000 kilometers by itself, autonomously. So he gave them this challenge. His challenge to the fellow engineers was design and build the following optical lens and electrical navigation system. Okay, the requirements for the lens system are thus: the lens system must be able to see in all directions simultaneously, like the compound eyes of the Monarch. The lens system must be capable of seeing all the colors of the rainbow and also ultraviolet light, and detect the polarization of sunlight, which it uses to navigate even when it's mostly cloudy. Number 3, the lens system must detect objects as small as 0.04 inches in diameter to as large as 10 feet from distances of 1 inch to 20 feet. The light from the lens system must be converted into electrical voltage pulses whose magnitudes shall be proportional to the light intensity, a maximum amplitude or voltage of only 20 millivolts, delivered to a central computer via an electrical network system containing no more than 72,000 paths. The electrical pulses must have a discernible value even when the light intensity is only that of a full moon. The central computer must be capable of translating as many as 72,000 electrical voltage pulses into a meaningful image. Requirements for the navigation system, and now it gets a bit harder. Sensors, yeah, as if it weren't hard enough already. Sensors must be provided to detect the direction of the Earth's magnetic field and the position of the sun. The central computer must be able, from an input of information on the sun's position and the Earth's magnetic field, to determine its present position, longitude and latitude, to an accuracy of plus or minus 100 feet, or basically to duplicate GPS accuracy without GPS satellites. Number 3, the computer must be capable of directing its navigation pilot, which is an autopilot, to a new location that it's never seen before, as far away as 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers, to an accuracy of plus or minus 100 feet. It must also be able to navigate over the ocean, beyond the sight of land, more than 1,000 kilometers nonstop, and intersect tiny islands, which requires true precision navigation. It's never seen this ocean before, it's never seen the islands before. Other requirements. Now it gets a bit harder yet. The system must be designed to weigh less than 0.5 grams. Ouch. 2, the system must be smaller than a pea. 3, the system must be designed to be built in 8 days by one person in total darkness, using mostly basic raw materials and very few prefabricated parts. Yeah, that's exactly what the Monarch does in that chrysalis. Man. The system must have the capability to continually reproduce itself several times per year for at least several thousand years, while maintaining sufficient quality control so its navigation equipment can still accomplish the precision mission requirements. Now this, of course, puts it beyond anything we can do in the 21st century. We cannot, to this day, produce a single machine, no matter how big or small, that is capable to extract energy autonomously from the environment, to build itself up, to maintain itself, to repair itself automatically, and then to autonomously make virtual exact copies of itself all by itself without any outside help. Completely autonomous reproduction is unique to the world of biology. It has the fingerprints of the divine all over it. It is something we cannot achieve for love nor money even today in the 21st century. The tiniest bacterium can do that. but no machines of human manufacture can do it. We can only dream of doing it, but we can't do it. Well, at this point, the fellow engineers were practically rolling in the aisles thinking, God, this guy is so funny. He's made such a ridiculous challenge. He knows nobody in the world. No dream team of engineers with all the trillions of dollars in the world's bank at their disposal could possibly make such a micro aerial vehicle that can do all these things. I mean, can man make any mechanical device that would run continuously for thousands of years, much less reproduce and migrate autonomously for thousands of kilometers and do that for millennia without fail? It's inconceivable. Is technology beyond what we have? But with man, it is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Well, he said, I'll tell you, my fellow engineers, this micro, self-navigating, self-reproducing aerial vehicle does exist and has been functioning perfectly for thousands of years. It is the Monarch Butterfly. And his engineers got a whole new appreciation of things that are engineered by God versus what is engineered by man. Now, in the migration, again, the monarchs have to come down to the lower latitudes to escape freezing weather. They'll come down to Pacific Palisades in Southern California, Baja Peninsula. Most of them, the lion's share, go to the neovolcanic mountains about 200 miles west of Mexico City, and some even go down here to the base of the Yucatan Peninsula, where they have good guacamole. Okay, and that's Guatemala. Okay. But, of course, they have to get back and fly up to where their only food source is, and some of them go as far as Nova Scotia, Canada. Wow, that's 5,000 kilometers to get back to the neovolcanic mountains when they have to come back. So that is that generation there, the fourth generation, that lives at least 8 months and has enough lifespan to get down there, overwinter for a few months, and then come back to start a new generation. When they come down, apparently a pheromone is left by their great-great-grandparents. They can get within 100 feet of the tree that their great-great-grandparents left from, and then they can smell that pheromone. It lasts that long. And they can go to exactly the same tree that their great-great-grandparents came from. So it's actually more accurate in that sense than even GPS. Now, this is a spectacular sight in nature. If you ever get down to the neovolcanic mountains, you see scores of millions of these creatures coming in, virtually blotting out the sun. Just an amazing thing. I've never seen it except on film, and even there it's awe-inspiring. But if you ever get the chance, you should avail yourself of it. Now, they keep coming in by the millions and millions, although not so much as there used to be. Used to be upwards of 300 million monarchs migrating in North America. Now it's down by 80%, only 60 million. I know when I was a kid, we'd go out and find monarchs all over the place. Milkweed was all over the place, and not anymore. A lot of habitat has been destroyed, and a lot of their main food source has been deprived. Anyway, they keep coming in, flying in, and they'll cluster together, especially at night, to conserve body temperature, because it does get cold at night at altitude. And they keep coming in, and they keep clustering and clustering closer and closer, until some of these trees literally are completely covered with monarchs. They estimate something like 100,000 monarchs per tree. Wow. Pretty amazing when you think about it. Now, here we have a satellite map of North America. And can anybody locate on here the tiny Bermuda Islands? I'll give you a clue. It's at one of the acute angles of the Bermuda Triangle. Aha, okay. That might not help too much. Okay, well, let's have a little closer. Anybody see it there? Well, they're awfully small. And to try to see them, these monarchs migrate to find these tiny little islands they've never seen in their life, leaving from Nova Scotia. Well, if you look at the base of this red arrow, it's right there. That's all the Bahama Islands and that tiny little speck. They have to leave from up here in Nova Scotia and fly over 1,000 kilometers, and if they're off by 1/4 of a degree, they'll miss those islands by so many miles they never see them from the air. They'll run out of fuel and drown in the ocean, and that means extinction. So some evolutionists said, well, they have a simple compass that guides them. Well, no. You have to have the ability to compute proper longitude and latitude of your present position. You have to have an accurate map that tells you exactly where those islands are, that they do exist, and this is their longitude and latitude, and you have to be able to compute how to get there and to correct against wind drift. They only fly during the day. And even though they can fly 30 miles an hour in calm conditions, which is really fast for an insect. The fastest insect in the world, anybody know what that is? Dragonfly. It flies 38 miles an hour. Monarchs can go 30. Bees only fly about 12 miles an hour. You ever try to outrun a bee? Not very easy. 12 miles an hour. If you ran 12 miles an hour for 5 minutes, you'd run a 5-minute mile. That's how fast that is. So it's pretty fast. Well, even at 30 miles an hour, they can't go over 1,000 kilometers in a single day. How in the world do they make it out to these tiny islands? they wait for and use a tailwind. And that tailwind gives them the extra energy and velocity to make it. But no tailwind is perfect. They have to constantly correct for wind drift. And with big wings, boy, wind drift is a big problem. And yet they're able to do it on the fly, taking sightings of the sun and their internal biological clock to determine longitude and latitude all along the way and precisely intercept these tiny islands. That takes much more than a mere magnetic compass, which they do have that also. Now, so they take off in this first epic flight. You know, they come out of their chrysalis. They've never been there before, this fourth generation. It has to determine longitude and latitude where it is, have to know the right angle to take off and intersect, correct for wind drift, and hit those tiny Bermuda Islands. Then it waits for the right conditions and tailwind to get it down to, what islands are down here? Bahamas, right. The Bahama Islands, where aren't all that good. Then they actually go to Cuba. Now, they don't stay there very long because they're made by God and they're conservative and they don't really like it there that much. So they quickly depart, after filling up on nectar, to here. Anybody know where that is? Jamaica, yeah. And then they leave from Jamaica to Guatemala, where they have good guacamole and tamales. Guatemala, yes, okay. Anyway, over 5,000 kilometers, zigzagging, hitting specific islands. That means they have to have incredible navigational equipment and abilities. So what are the secrets of the Monarch's navigation capabilities? Well, first of all, it has these amazing compound eyes, 6,000 hexagonal facets on each side, 12,000 altogether, which can detect the polarization of sunlight, which means if there's only a little patch of blue in the whole sky, they can still determine by the apex of the polarized sunlight where the sun is. Where is the sun? Is it over here? Is it over here? Is it over here? Well, you're trying to navigate precisely. You better know exactly where it is, even on a cloudy day. Well, it can determine that the sun is hiding behind the clouds over here. But it's not enough to do that. You can produce, or you can compute proper latitude if you take precision sightings of the sun, which it can do. It has the equivalent of a sextant in its special little slits that it has in its antennae. But you also have to have a calendar, because the position of the sun based on the season of the year can be quite different. You also have to have a navigator's almanac so that your sightings of the sun can then be run through the graphs and logarithmic calculations to see what that means. That means you're exactly here at this season of the year on the globe. You know, this is your latitude. But you also have to be able to determine longitude, something that was very difficult. During the days of sailing ships, they didn't have a marine chronometer that would work at sea. They had the old pendulum clocks, you know, like the grandfather clock. You put that on a rocking and rolling ship and it doesn't work at all. So they had to develop the spiral watch spring that you'd wind up and was impervious to the rocking and rolling of the ship. But they have a built-in biological clock, a chronometer, that tells them exactly local time based on the sighting of the sun, right, you know, the azimuth where it is on the horizon at the precise moment of sunrise. Take the time. The time then has to be compared with the time at the standard meridian, which means zero longitude, which often is called Greenwich Mean Time in the civilian navigation, or Zulu time by the military. So you take this clock and subtract to find the difference between local time and zero longitude time. Then that number has to be divided by a certain number to determine your longitude. Does everybody know what number you divide by? Well, I'm sorry, you're all going to be lost at sea. Too bad, so sad. If you're a monarch, you don't have to worry about it. God has given you a supercomputer brain the size of a pinhead that runs all these calculations automatically. The equivalent of the sextant, of course, but you also have to have, in case it's totally cloudy or foggy, you can still go on the general heading with a magnetic compass until things clear up and then you get more precise celestial navigation. Even all this is worthless. Even if you have all the right instrumentation and the instinctual knowledge of how to use it. As we just saw, if you don't know how to run the calculations, all the instruments are worthless. You got to know how to use it. But even if you have all that, it's not going to work unless you have something else. Does anybody know what's missing? You can determine your proper longitude and latitude, but you have to have something else. You have to have an accurate map of the Earth. An accurate map. Because if your map tells you, well, you know, the Bermuda Islands are over here when actually they're over there, you go to the proper longitude and latitude that the map says, but lo and behold, the islands aren't there because your map is inaccurate. You see, all of this is irreducibly complex. All of this has to work together or it doesn't work at all, and you die. Something explains instantaneous perfection of design. It's called miraculous creation. It's the only thing that can. Blind random destructive mutations, even if they could work, would take ages of time, and unless it all works together at the same time, you die. So it would never work. So to put this in a greater perspective, you could ask yourself, how well could you navigate if you were treated like this? You know, you come out of a coffin, like a vampire. You're somewhere in North America. You've never been there before. You have to fly to tiny islands that you've never seen before, over an ocean you've never seen before. You have this instinct to do that, so you can fly, but you have limited fuel. You run out of fuel, you're going to drown. You've got to hit those islands. If you go past them and miss them, you're going to die for sure. And then you think, well, gee, how am I going to do this? I know. In Boy Scouts, they taught me that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And at night, to the edge of the Big Dipper, I can see Polaris, the North Star. So I can determine north, south, east, and west, but what if it's foggy or cloudy? Well, last time you ate a box of Cracker Jacks, you remembered, by golly, I kept the toy. And the toy was a magnetic compass. Okay. So now, even if it's foggy or cloudy, I can determine north, south, east, and west, and you're just about to take off over this ocean you've never seen before, and it dawns on you that it's completely insufficient to know north, south, east, and west. You have to know your precise position on a accurate map, your longitude and latitude. You have to determine that. Then you have to determine the longitude and latitude of the target islands that you've never seen before, and that takes all that precision instrumentation and the training and knowledge to use it. And you just don't have that unless you're a monarch, okay? The king of butterflies, okay? So as Jules Poirier points out, it would be extremely difficult for humans to duplicate the navigational achievements of monarch butterflies. Human navigators would require a clock, a sextant, a current astronomical almanac, a compass, and a current magnetic map of the region. Even with these instruments, they would require a high level of observational skill and computational ability to travel some 3,600 kilometers across a continent between specific locations, and much more so when you have to go 5,000 kilometers hitting tiny islands you've never seen before. It is indeed inconceivable that evolution could ever have pulled this off. Now, recognizing design, is there a double standard? I think so. Here we have the Harvard microbotic fly, which they're so proud of. My goodness, what achievement in the 21st century. We produced this thing which actually can compete with the Monarch for weight requirements, and it can hover without crashing. Oh, that is a major achievement, believe it or not. However, you'll notice they cheat a little bit. It has little copper wires there. That means there's an off-board power source. If they had to put an on-board source like a battery, it would weigh too much and probably have extremely limited flight endurance. In fact, it might not even be able to take off at all. So it can't begin to compete with the Monarch that can easily fly hundreds of kilometers in a single day at 30 miles an hour and then automatically refuel itself. It's equipped to do that. Well, we'll have to get a little bigger to compete with the Monarch, and that is, here we have the Raven, a hand-launched UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle with a camera in it. It's big enough to have a GPS computer, so they can launch this and then program it to return to the GPS coordinates it left from. But it's much bigger and heavier than the Monarch. It has to have a big, heavy-duty laptop computer to program it and everything. And it can only go about 6 miles out, look over the hill, what's the enemy doing, and then it has to come right back. Only has a 12-mile endurance. If it doesn't come right back, it'll run out of fuel and crash. Well, it can't compete with the Monarch. It not only weighs more, it has very limited flight endurance. So to really match the Monarch, we got to get a lot bigger and a lot heavier, such as with the Navy's Tomahawk cruise missile. Yeah, this is a little bit bigger, about 2,900 pounds. It is, of course, big enough to have fuel to travel hundreds of kilometers fast in a single day, so it can match the flight endurance of the Monarch. GPS navigation is essentially as accurate. It can hit within 15 feet or so of its intended target, more than accurate enough to take out a building, which is what they're usually targeted against, but at the expense of a tremendous weight. And even then it can't compete with the Monarch. For example, if we ask which is more complex, again, the tiniest bacterium is far more complex than any machine man has ever conceived of creating, much less succeeded at. The tiniest bacterium is auto-maintaining, self-healing and repairing, self-reproducing. Our best fighter jets today, F-15 Eagle, F-22 Raptor, for every hour of flight, they have to have a minimum of 12 hours to 20 hours, but minimum of 12 for downtime for inspection and maintenance for every hour of flight. This thing has been flying autonomously, reproducing itself for thousands of years. It is self-assessing, self-healing, self-maintaining, self-navigating, self-reproducing. It is so far beyond our technology that there's no adequate words to put it in. Well, it doesn't cut it on that score. Number two, which is more reliable and less vulnerable? Well, the Monarch uses celestial navigation. Unless the sun, moon, the stars, and the magnetic field disappears, it's always going to work. Whereas our GPS satellites do not always work, and I'll testify to that. I've been navigating by GPS for years. My Magellan just broke down. I had it for maybe 4 or 5 years. These things have been running perfectly for thousands of years. My doggone GPS, 4 or 5 years, and it's kaput. It just won't last very long. But often it'll tell you, turn left when you can see the church is on the right. It'll take you up around the corner, finally get you there by some wild goose chase. Sometimes it took me to a dirt road in Nevada and said, "You have arrived." There's nothing in sight. I've arrived where? The moon, So I had to reprogram it, reboot it. I had the right coordinates. I had to reboot it, and finally it took me to where I wanted to go. That happens all the time. But the worst thing is the vulnerability. If our enemies send up an EMP device, thermonuclear explosion in the atmosphere, will destroy all our GPS and other satellites, destroy most of our electronics on the continent, what'll happen to the Monarch? It'll migrate just as accurately as it ever has before. It's not reliable. It's not relying on the vulnerable GPS system. Even a natural disaster can wipe out GPS. A big solar flare or a massive coronal ejection will fry our GPS satellites. What'll happen to the Monarch? Nothing at all. It'll still migrate and navigate as it has for thousands of years. Finally, we ask the question, which was designed and which happened by chance? And our pathetic scientists, who may be brilliant in some areas, as the Bible says, when they reject the truth, they knew God but would not honor him as God, God turns them over to a reprobate mind. And I'll tell you, it's a reprobate, insane mind that says, this obviously was designed and we accept that, but this happened by a bunch of blind random accidents. It's the antithesis of insanity, There's an old proverb that says, whom the gods would destroy, they first drive insane. Yeah, well, the Bible says a little bit differently. Because they love not the truth, God shall send them a strong delusion, that they might all be judged to love not the truth, but have their pleasure in unrighteousness. God will give them what they want. They believe their own lies. He sends them a strong delusion, because that's what they want, that's what they get. And professing to be wise, they become fools, unfortunately. Now, in conclusion, Darwin's confession in his famous book on the origin of species, he said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, you can't wait for ages of slight modifications to get the perfection you need for the metamorphic process. He also said concerning instincts, many instincts are so wonderful that their development will probably appear to the reader a difficulty sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. Well, amen, Brother Charlie, I think it does. You can't have anything but perfection in all of these situations or you die. And that type of instant perfection, which can only come by instantaneous miraculous creation, is something that we can explain, but they cannot, not reasonably. Finally, 2 last questions. Why did God create the monarch butterfly? I believe there are 2 major reasons. Number 1, to teach us of God's attributes. As the great patriarch Job said, but now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Job is basically saying if God would give to these little creatures we consider to be dumb animals the ability to speak like he did with Balaam's donkey, they would not say, oh, praise the blind watchmaker of evolution. They would say, praise the Lord. It is his hand who has made us. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And man, of course, is even more so, fearfully and wonderfully made in the very image of God. And there will, of course, be a day of reckoning, as it says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature and attributes, that is, his eternal power and divinity, have been made intelligible and clearly discernible in and through the things that have been made, his handiworks. Today we've looked at just one of his handiworks, the marvelous monarch butterfly. So men are without excuse, altogether without any defense or justification. Secondly, why did God create the monarch butterfly? I believe to give us a beautiful illustration of his power to cause miraculous transformation from spiritual death and physical death to life everlasting. As it says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. To give us that transforming power, which we first experience spiritually by the new birth, it happens on the inside, and spiritually we're made new creatures. We might look the same on the outside other than having a big smile and being a lot happier than we used to be, but it's a spiritual transformation on the inside. But to give us that, it cost God everything. It's the gift that bankrupt heaven. Somebody had to pay a horrific price to be able to make us new creatures. And, 1,000 years before Jesus died on the cross, crucifixion, in a spirit of prophecy, by the Spirit of God, David in Psalm 22 spoke and gave us a picture of the crucifixion of Christ. Wow. I mean, that was centuries before crucifixion had even been invented as a means of execution. But in Psalm 22, David said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The very words uttered by Christ on the cross 1,000 years later. He said, all my bones are out of joint. My enemies compass me about. My hands and my feet are pierced. And he said one other thing. Well, actually, Job, I forgot about this one. Interesting quote from Job. He said, how then can man be righteous before God? Or how can he be pure who is born of a woman? If even the moon does not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is a maggot and a son of man who is a worm? Why is man made in the image of God just a maggot and a worm? Well, because of the fall of man. We're now in a sinful, fallen, despicable state where in Jeremiah it says, the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? How far we have fallen from what God intended. And when Christ became man, he did more than just step down from being the creator of the universe. He became lower than the angels. He became in the form of man. But he also became a worm and a maggot. And that's one thing that David said in the spirit of prophecy in Psalm 22. He said, but I am a worm and not a man. You see, as the monarch caterpillar or worm is doomed by its nature, it has to eat nothing but poison to survive. And that poison actually gives it protection from predators. Jesus fully entered into our state, humbling himself to a degree we can't fathom. And I don't know how God did this, but it says he bore our sins in his body on the tree. And he did more than that. He who knew no sin was made to be sin, so that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Jesus became the lowest of the low. He partook of our poison so that we would be free for eternity from predation by sin and by Satan. And because that worm eats poison by nature, the heavenly creature that resurrects from it is protected forever. It doesn't have to eat poison anymore. But because the worm did it for it, it's protected. Jesus became a worm. Protect us forever from the ravages of sin. As it says in Philippians 3:21, Christ shall change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working whereby he is able even to subdue all things unto himself. You see, becoming a worm, becoming a maggot, absorbing the filth and the putrid, wretched sin of the world caused him to die. He wouldn't have died otherwise because he was without sin. But he voluntarily entered into a tomb of his own choosing, and he made that clear. No man takes my life. I lay it down, that I might take it up again. On the third day, he rose from that voluntary tomb with a new and glorious body. And the Bible says that's the first fruits. His immortal resurrection body is the kind of body we're going to have. Our vile body shall be fashioned like unto his glorious body. A body that will never get old or sick or die. A body suitable for a new heaven and new earth where righteousness dwells. But there's no more sorrow, no more sickness, no more pain, no more tears, no more curse, and no more death. For the former things are passed away. And I think God put this type and shadow in nature, although many people overlook it so easily. But the God who can take a vile, poisonous worm and through death and resurrection create a heavenly creature, it's a type and shadow of the power of God through the gospel of Jesus Christ. We died with Christ mystically through faith in him. We rose. We are new creatures spiritually, and we will rise from the dead. As Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet he shall live with a glorious eternal body that will never get old or sick or die. What God can do for the monarch butterfly, he can do for us. And there's a reminder of that every spring and summer. The transforming power of the gospel of Christ. When he does it for the monarch, it is indeed a miracle, but when he does it for us, it is far more significant, and the effects are everlasting. That, my friends, is the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, I thank you for your attention, and tonight I hope you'll come back. Tonight we're going to look at evolution and the UFO connection. You know, just this week, the Pope said that he would baptize aliens when they inevitably show up. Yeah, the Vatican has already appointed an ambassador for when aliens arrive. They're fully expecting that. The UN has appointed an ambassador for when aliens arrive. Now, the Bible says the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. What is the lie being promoted by the world system under his sway? Evolution and aliens. So the church had better be prepared for this end-time delusion, both scientifically and especially scripturally. If you come tonight, you'll be prepared. So, be there or be square. Okay.